Growing up, my family felt pretty normal. My dad worked long hours, always the first one to leave in the morning, and sometimes the last one to come home at night. He was the kind of guy who always had a reason for being busy. If he wasn't in his office working late, he was out of town on a business trip, or meeting a client. My mom never seemed to question it. I didn't either. It was just how things were. That's how it had been for as long as I could remember. Our family wasn't huge, but we were close-knit. I had a younger brother, who spent most of his time glued to his Xbox, and my mom, who pretty much ran everything else around the house. She handled the finances, cooked dinner, and made sure everyone stayed on schedule. Dad wasn't really around much, but when he was, everything felt normal. We'd have dinner as a family, and he'd joke around, asking about our days like nothing was out of the ordinary. To be honest, I never really thought to question it. But a few months ago, I started noticing little things that didn't quite add up. It wasn't anything major at first. My dad had always been careful with details, but there were moments when he seemed distracted or caught off guard by simple questions. Like one weekend, my mom asked if he could take the day off for my brother's birthday, and Dad said he'd be out of town for work. No big deal, except I overheard him on the phone later telling someone that he wasn't leaving town until the following Monday. I didn't think much of it then. Maybe he had the dates mixed up or something. But still, it stuck with me. Then there was the time my mom mentioned some extra charges on the credit card. She wasn't mad, just curious. "Did you pick up something from Toys R Us?" she asked Dad. We were all sitting in the living room, watching TV when she said it. My dad's face barely changed, but I noticed how quickly he shrugged it off. "Oh yeah, I picked up a gift for a client's kid," he said. I wasn't even paying attention until he said it, and then something about it felt off. My dad wasn't the type to remember birthdays, not even for close family friends, let alone a client's kid. Another time, I was helping my mom with laundry and found a crumpled receipt in the pocket of one of my dad's jackets. I didn't mean to snoop, but the receipt caught my eye because it was for a toy store. And not just any toy store, one we had never been to. It listed some pretty specific items: a toy kitchen set and some kind of superhero action figure. Now, I knew my brother and I hadn't received anything like that recently, and it wasn't the kind of thing my dad would buy on a whim. I asked Mom about it, but she just shrugged and said it was probably for another work thing. Still, it gnawed at me. A few weeks later, things got weirder. My dad had always been somewhat private with his phone, but recently he'd been almost paranoid about it. I'd notice him slipping out of the room to take calls, or he'd quickly flip his phone over when I walked by. It wasn't just the phone, though. His entire demeanor had changed. He'd come home later than usual, looking more tired than before, and sometimes he'd disappear on weekends, claiming it was for work emergencies. The tipping point came one Saturday afternoon when I was scrolling through Instagram. I don't even know how it happened, but I saw my dad in the background of someone's post. It was a picture of a woman I didn't know, standing with a little girl who looked about 5 or 6. The woman was tagged in the post, and I recognized the location, some restaurant in a part of town my dad never mentioned going to. But it wasn't the woman or the location that caught my attention. It was my dad, sitting at the table in the background with a smile on his face. It was like someone had punched me in the gut. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, zooming in and out, trying to make sense of it. I even showed it to a couple of friends, but they couldn't believe it either. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't him. But I knew. Deep down, I knew it was him. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I started paying closer attention to everything. I checked his social media, but his accounts were locked down tight. Then, I noticed the odd timing of his business trips. He always seemed to be away around the same weekends every month. And those toys, why would my dad, who barely knew what I liked for Christmas, be buying kids toys out of the blue? One night, I decided to push a little. While my dad was in his office, I knocked on the door and casually asked about the woman in the picture. I didn't mention the Instagram post, just brought up a random scenario that fit. "Do you know anyone who has a daughter?" "I saw someone who kind of looked like you with a little girl," I said. He froze for a second, just a split second, but it was enough. Then he laughed it off and said I must have been mistaken. But I wasn't. After that, things spiraled fast. I started checking his phone when he wasn't around, scanning for anything that could explain the Instagram photo. And then I found it. A message thread with the woman from the picture. It wasn't even hidden, just buried in a list of contacts I'd never noticed before. I didn't open the messages. I couldn't bring myself to, but the contact name alone told me everything I needed to know. Home, Clara. The word hit me like a brick, and suddenly, everything made sense. The toys, the weekends away, the missing pieces of his life that I'd been too blind to see. My dad wasn't just hiding something, he was hiding an entire life, and I was the only one who knew. At that moment, I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him? Should I tell my mom? I couldn't believe what I'd just uncovered, but one thing was clear. This was bigger than anything I had ever imagined, and I wasn't ready for what would come next. After I saw the message labeled Home, Clara on my dad's phone, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. This wasn't just some misunderstanding or coincidence. The realization hit hard. My dad was living a double life, and I had to know everything. The first thing I did was check if there were more clues I'd missed. I didn't want to confront him right away without knowing the full story. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with figuring out the truth. I tried not to act any different around him, but I started digging in secret. Anytime he wasn't home, I'd sneak into his office and go through his things, looking for anything that might explain what was going on. I knew it was risky, but it felt like the only way to get answers. I found more receipts, dinners at restaurants we'd never been to, hotel stays that didn't line up with any of his so-called business trips, and even a plane ticket stub from a city I was sure he had no reason to visit. Each new piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin, confirming that what I feared was real. Then, one night while he was asleep, I went back into his phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the messages with Clara. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I saw. It wasn't just friendly conversation or work-related stuff. There were pictures, photos of my dad with a woman I didn't recognize, along with a little girl. They looked like a family, smiling, happy. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The little girl had his eyes, his smile, and she looked like she was around 5 or 6. I clicked through more photos, birthday parties, trips to the park, even Christmas mornings. It was all there, a life that didn't include me or my mom. I found messages between my dad and Clara talking about this other life, making plans for holidays, discussing the little girl's school and doctor's appointments, things I'd never imagined my dad doing with someone else. Everything about their conversations made it clear this wasn't some temporary fling or a mistake. He had a whole second family. Clara referred to him as her husband, and in one of the messages, she even talked about how their daughter was starting to ask why daddy has to go away so much. That's when it hit me the hardest. He wasn't just lying to us, he was lying to them too. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the phone. I didn't know what to do next. I had all the proof I needed, but now what? I couldn't exactly walk up to my mom and say, hey, guess what? Dad has another wife and a kid. And what about my brother? He was too young to understand any of this. Everything in our lives would explode if I told anyone. The next few days were torture. I kept running the same questions over and over in my head. Should I confront him? Should I tell my mom? I tried to go about life as normally as I could, but every time I saw my dad, all I could think about was that other family. He'd come home late, tired, and I'd wonder if he'd just spent the day with them. I started going deeper into the investigation. I didn't know where Clara lived, but I had some clues. One of the receipts I found listed an address for a toy store that was in a different part of town. I figured it was worth a shot, so I went there one afternoon, pretending I was shopping for my brother's birthday. The store was pretty small, and I didn't expect to find anything, but then I saw it. There behind the register was a framed photo of a recent community event, and in the background I saw my dad again. He was standing with Clara and the little girl, looking completely comfortable, like he belonged there. That's when I knew for sure. I left the store without buying anything and went straight to my car, sitting there for what felt like forever. There was no more doubt. My dad wasn't just cheating on my mom, he had a whole second family that was part of a different world, one we knew nothing about. I considered hiring a private investigator, but by now I had more than enough evidence. My mind was racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Did the other family know about us? Did they know he was living a double life too? Every time I thought about confronting him, I froze. What would I even say? And worse, how would my mom react when she found out? I kept quiet for a little while longer, but it was getting harder to act normal. Every time I looked at my dad, I felt a mix of anger and confusion. I'd catch him on the phone with Clara, using some vague excuse about work, and it took everything in me not to just shout at him right there. But I knew I couldn't do that. Not yet. One evening, my dad mentioned he'd be going on another business trip the following weekend. This time, I didn't believe it for a second. I knew where he was really going to be with Clara and their daughter. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around and wonder anymore. I needed to see it for myself. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. That Saturday, while my dad was supposedly away on business, I followed him. It wasn't hard. He left the house in the morning, just like usual, but instead of going to the airport or his office, he drove across town. I stayed a few cars behind him, my heart racing the whole time. Finally, he pulled into the driveway of a small house in a quiet neighborhood I'd never been to. I parked down the street, watching from a distance as he got out of the car. A few minutes later, the front door opened and Clara came out. She kissed him on the cheek, and their daughter ran up to hug him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They looked like any normal family. I sat there for a while, just watching, feeling more and more sure of what I had to do next. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to confront him. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, but I wasn't ready to reveal my plan just yet. I needed to figure out the best way to do it without blowing everything up. For now, I just had to wait. The more I thought about it, the more I knew there was no way out of this without confronting my dad. After weeks of digging, watching, and collecting evidence, I had hit my breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal while knowing the truth. My mom was walking around the house completely clueless, and my brother had no idea that his whole world was about to be turned upside down. I wasn't sure how to handle it, but I knew that the longer I waited, the worse it would get. It was a Friday evening when I finally decided to confront him. My dad had just gotten home from one of his so-called business trips. I was in my room when I heard the front door open. Normally, he'd greet everyone and ask about their day, but this time I couldn't even look at him. I knew too much now. I had seen the house. I had seen Clara and the little girl. I had read the messages. The lies were right there in front of me, and I couldn't stay quiet any longer. After dinner, I waited until everyone else was distracted. My mom was watching TV, and my brother was in his room. I knew I had to talk to my dad alone. away from them, so I went to his office. I knocked on the door, and when he looked up, I told him we needed to talk. He seemed a bit caught off guard, but he didn't say much. He just nodded and closed his laptop, giving me his full attention. The silence was unbearable as I sat down across from him. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head 100 times, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure how to start. I could feel the tension building in the room as we sat there. I decided to rip the Band-Aid off. I told him that I knew everything. I had seen the messages with Clara. I had followed him to the house. I had watched him with his other family. Every word felt heavier than the last. I didn't give him time to interrupt or try to explain anything away. I laid out all the evidence, the receipts, the photos, the little girl. There was no way he could talk his way out of this. At first, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, like he was processing what I had just said. For a second, I thought he might try to deny it, but then he sighed and leaned back in his chair. He didn't look angry or defensive, just defeated. He started talking slowly, choosing his words carefully. He admitted that what I had seen was true. He had another family. Clara was his second wife, and the little girl was his daughter. He explained that it hadn't started out this way. According to him, he never intended to have two families. It all started years ago when he met Clara on one of his business trips. What was supposed to be a fling turned into something more, and before he knew it, Clara was pregnant. He told me he felt trapped. He couldn't leave my mom and brother behind, but he couldn't abandon Clara and their child either. So he decided to live this double life. He said he never meant to hurt anyone, but that just felt like an excuse. The more he talked, the more I realized just how complicated everything was. He had been juggling two lives for years, telling each family just enough to keep them from finding out about the other. But the shocking part was when he revealed that Clara didn't know about us. For all these years, she believed that he was single. She had no idea that he had a whole other family in a different part of town. That's why he had been so careful with his time, making sure that the two worlds never collided. He said that if Clara ever found out, it would destroy everything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How had he managed to keep this secret for so long? And why hadn't he come clean to either of us? I pressed him on it, asking why he hadn't told my mom the truth years ago. His response was that he didn't want to lose us. He didn't want to break up our family. But at the same time, he couldn't walk away from Clara and their daughter either. He was stuck in a situation that he couldn't see a way out of. Then he dropped another bombshell. Clara lived only a few miles away from us. All this time, he had kept them so close, yet far enough that we'd never cross paths. I was speechless. Not only had he managed to keep this secret hidden for years, but he had been living this double life practically under our noses. I asked him what he planned to do now. He didn't have an answer. He was still trying to figure out how to keep both families from finding out about each other. He looked exhausted, like he had been carrying the weight of this secret for so long that he didn't know how to let it go. But there was no way to keep things hidden anymore. I had seen too much, and now I knew that everything was about to come crashing down. Before I left the room, my dad told me something that made my stomach drop. He said that if this came out in the open, it wasn't just going to be a family issue. There were legal complications too. Bigamy. Apparently he had married Clara as well, which meant that legally he could be in serious trouble if anyone found out. There were secret assets, properties, and a whole mess of things tied up between the two lives he had built. I couldn't believe it. Not only had my dad been living a double life, but he had also entangled himself in a legal nightmare. This wasn't just about lying to us anymore. There were real consequences at stake. And now, I had to decide what to do with this information. I left his office with more questions than answers. Everything was unraveling, and I had no idea how to stop it. What was I supposed to do now? Keep the secret and protect him, or blow it all up and risk losing everything? One thing was for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. After that conversation with my dad, everything between us felt different. I couldn't even look at him the same way. The man I had grown up thinking I knew, this hardworking, dedicated father wasn't just a man living a lie. He was living two lives. Our relationship was broken. Every time I saw him, all I could think about was the secret he'd been hiding from us for years, the other family he was keeping just a few miles away, and the fact that he was a bigamist. It got harder to act normal around him, especially since my mom and brother were still completely in the dark. They had no idea that their lives were built on a foundation of lies. I couldn't keep avoiding my dad, though. There were too many moments where we had to be in the same room, especially during family meals or when he and my mom would casually chat about their day. I could tell he was trying his best to pretend that nothing had changed, but I wasn't buying it anymore. My mom had always been pretty sharp, so it wasn't long before she started noticing something was off. I wasn't sure if she could sense the tension between me and my dad, or if it was something else, but she started asking more questions about my day, about how things were going at school. She even asked about my dad's recent business trips and whether I thought he was working too hard. At first, I tried to play it cool, answering as casually as possible, but it was getting harder to keep up the act. There were times when I'd catch myself almost letting something slip, like when she'd talk about how hard dad was working for us, and I'd have to bite my tongue to keep from blurting out the truth. But every time I thought about telling her, the weight of what it would do to her stopped me. Then there were little moments, like when I noticed a strange piece of mail that had been delivered to our house. It was addressed to my dad but had Clara's last name on it. I froze when I saw it, unsure of what to do. Should I hand it over to him? Or should I show it to my mom? In the end, I slipped it onto his desk when no one was looking. I knew that if my mom saw it, it would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. But the more I tried to keep things under control, the more it felt like the whole situation was spiraling out of my hands. One evening, my dad got a phone call. I wasn't paying attention at first, but then I noticed the look on his face. He was tense, his voice low. I couldn't make out the details, but I had a sinking feeling that the call wasn't about work. After he hung up, he glanced at me, and there was a moment of silent understanding between us. That phone call had something to do with his other family. I was sure of it. The next big blow came during a family gathering. It was my brother's birthday, and my mom had planned a small party at home. We had relatives over, a few close friends, and everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. As the party went on, I noticed my dad kept checking his phone, stepping out of the room every so often to take calls. Each time he returned, he looked more stressed than before. And then, out of nowhere, my mom's phone rang. I didn't think much of it at first, but when she answered, her expression changed. She looked confused, then angry. I watched as she excused herself and walked into the other room, leaving the rest of us awkwardly standing around. My dad had gone outside at that point, still on the phone, oblivious to what was happening inside. A few minutes later, my mom came back, her face pale. She looked around the room but didn't say anything. I had no idea what was going on, but I could tell that something had shifted. That call had rattled her. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I overheard my mom talking to my dad. They were in their bedroom with the door closed, but their voices carried through the walls. I couldn't make out everything, but I caught enough to understand that someone from his other life had called her, probably by mistake, and it had set off alarm bells in her head. For days after that, things were tense. My mom hadn't confronted him directly, but I could tell she was starting to suspect something. She was quieter, more distant, like she was piecing things together on her own. I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. My dad was walking on thin ice, and so was I. I started thinking more seriously about what to do next. Should I tell my mom everything before she found out on her own? If I waited too long, it might be worse when she inevitably figured it out, but I was terrified of what would happen if I told her. How would she react? Would she kick my dad out? Would my brother's world come crashing down too? The weight of the decision was paralyzing. Then the final push came when my mom found another clue. She didn't mention it to me directly, but I saw her staring at a receipt she had found in my dad's jacket, another one from a store we'd never been to. I watched as she tucked it away, probably planning to ask him about it later, but from the look on her face, I knew the wheels were already turning. I couldn't keep the secret any longer. It was only a matter of time before she confronted him herself, and I had to decide whether to step in before it all blew up in the worst way possible. The pressure was building, and I had reached my breaking point. I was out of options. The next time I had a chance, I would have to make a choice. Tell my mom everything or take another drastic step to stop this from spiraling further. But either way, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same again. And I had no idea what would happen once the truth finally came out. After days of tension building and knowing the inevitable was coming, my mom finally confronted my dad. I had stayed quiet, hoping that things would somehow resolve themselves, but the clues had piled up too high. She had found the strange receipt, noticed the unexplained absences, and now, after that phone call during my brother's birthday party, she couldn't ignore it anymore. It was a quiet evening when it all came crashing down. I was in my room when I heard my mom's voice, muffled but sharp. There was no mistaking the tone. She had found something, and this time there was no pretending. I went downstairs, moving slowly, almost like I didn't want to witness what was about to happen, but I couldn't avoid it. I stood at the bottom of the stairs as my mom and dad faced each other in the living room. The air was thick, and for a second, I thought about turning back, but I didn't. My mom was holding that same piece of mail I'd found days earlier, the one with Clara's last name. It had all clicked for her. My dad stood there, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd been caught in a trap. She demanded answers. She didn't raise her voice, but the way she spoke, the words were like knives. My dad didn't try to lie this time. He knew it was over. He started explaining, stumbling over his words at first, but once he realized there was no way out, the truth poured out like a flood. Everything I had learned weeks earlier about Clara, the little girl, the second house just a few miles away, was now out in the open. My mom was silent at first, listening to the full extent of the betrayal. When my dad finished, there was this moment of stillness. I don't think any of us breathed. And then, the dam broke. The shouting started. My mom unleashed years of frustration, hurt, and anger. My dad tried to justify his actions, saying things like he never meant for it to happen this way, that he was stuck and didn't know what to do. But nothing he said mattered at that point. The damage was done. My brother, who had been upstairs playing video games, came down when he heard the noise. He didn't understand what was happening at first. He looked from my mom to my dad, confused, asking why they were fighting. My mom didn't answer him. Instead, she turned to my dad, tears in her eyes, and asked the one question that had been hanging in the air. How could you do this to us? My dad didn't have an answer. There was nothing he could say to make any of it right. And my brother? He was just standing there trying to figure out what was going on, and it was like watching his world collapse. At that moment, I realized the full weight of what had been hidden for so long. Our family wasn't just breaking apart, It had been broken for years. We just hadn't known it. The days that followed were a blur of arguments and painful conversations. My mom asked my dad to leave the house, at least for a while. She needed space to think, to figure out what to do next. He didn't fight her on it. He packed a bag and left that night. I don't know where he went, but part of me assumed he went to Clara's house. With my dad gone, the silence in our home was suffocating. My mom wasn't the same. How could she be? She spent most of her time in her room, trying to process everything. My brother was too young to fully understand, but he knew enough to realize something terrible had happened. He asked me about it, but I didn't know how to explain it to him. How do you tell your younger sibling that their father has been living a lie? A week passed, and then another. We barely saw my dad, but we heard from him. He called to check in, but my mom never answered. The one time I picked up, he asked if I could meet him. He wanted to talk. Part of me didn't want to, but I went anyway. I needed to know what his plan was, how he thought any of this could be fixed. We met at a park, far from either of the homes he had. He looked tired, older somehow, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. We sat on a bench, and he started talking. He said he was sorry for how things had turned out. He admitted that he had been living in denial, thinking he could manage two families without it falling apart. He told me that Clara had found out about us too. After he left our house, he had told her everything. She was devastated, just like my mom, and now he was caught between two broken families. He said he didn't know what to do next. There were legal complications, of course. Bigamy wasn't something that could just be swept under the rug. But more than that, he was struggling with the fact that he had lost both of the lives he had built. He wanted to fix things, but there was no easy solution. I listened, but I didn't have much to say. I didn't have any answers for him. I was just as lost as he was. In the end, my parents didn't reconcile. My mom filed for divorce, and my dad stayed with Clara and their daughter. We don't talk much anymore. My mom is doing her best to move on, and my brother is still trying to understand why everything changed. As for me, I don't know what comes next. Life hasn't gone back to normal, and maybe it never will. The hardest part is knowing that the family I thought I had never really existed. We're all just trying to figure out how to move forward, but it's a slow process. Some days I think about cutting ties with my dad entirely, but part of me can't do it. Not yet, anyway. In the end, nothing wrapped up neatly. Life doesn't always work that way. There are no clean endings, no simple resolutions. We're just picking up the pieces and trying to figure out how to live with what's left.